Japan had a special situation when they had the second generation, the PDC technology was, on the way to be phased out. So therefore, the Japanese, let's say, operators have urgent need to find a new technology. So 3G technology just came on time. So therefore, I think our focus at that time from Ericsson side to say, let's help the Japanese customer to speed up their 3G rollout was very right. And that was an exciting time for me when I moved to Japan 2004.
Welcome to another episode of Transmissions from Tomorrow, the show that gives you an inside route to the people driving the digital transformation of business and technology in the world of telecommunications. And I'm your host, Dez Blanchfield. And today I have the privilege of having Ms. Sheng-Ann Yu, the Solution Line Head of Distributed Cloud for Ericsson Business Area Digital Services, with me in the studio. Hi, Sheng-Ann, how are you? Hi,
I'm good, thanks. Good morning, or good evening, or rather say, yeah.
It is a bit like that. I think for listeners to tuning in, just to give them some context, you're in Kista, just out of Stockholm. I think it's about a 15 to 20-minute drive out of Stockholm in the massive Ericsson complex.
Yes, I'm in the Ericsson office at the moment.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So it's about probably about 8:30 a.m. at your end there on February 13th. It's about 6:30 p.m. here in Sydney. I understand it's pretty cold there at the moment.
Yeah, it's zero, like -1, 0. So cannot complain. Has been colder before.
Wow, 0. That's for Australians, 0 degrees is frightening. I think it got to about 26 or 27 degrees centigrade here today, so it was hot. We were sweating. Well, thank you so much for joining me in the studio today. So just a little bit of background on you quickly. I mean, you've had an amazing background. I just want to share some of the amazing things you've done, and then we'll dive straight into a bit of background on you personally. You've attended the KTH Royal Institute of Technology and attained a couple of degrees there. You did a Master of Science in Engineering and Physics and Applied Maths. You did a Master of Science in the field of Physical Engineering and Applied Maths. That's mind-boggling. You also then went on to do an Executive Masters of Business on something called a Global Track, which I'll ask you about in a second, at the China Europe International Business School. You've done an amazing amount of volunteer work, but one of my favorites that I saw there was you were a volunteered board member on the board of the Swedish School in Beijing in China, working on the development of the Swedish School in Beijing. You've done a lot of public speaking and authorship. I think a couple that jumped out at me was in 2015, I remember you keynoted at the OpenStack Summit in Vancouver in British Columbia. And more recently, last year in 2017, you keynoted the IoT Week in Geneva in Switzerland. How do you squeeze all that into a day-to-day with your busy life?
Well, thanks for the great introduction. Yes, my life has been, busy, but then I truly love everything I do, especially my job at Ericsson. I've been with Ericsson for, let's say, 22 years now. I do love, every day to come to work. And also I've been passionate truly in study as well, like, the background, like you described, that I came to Sweden when I was 19 with a passion that I want to learn more about what's happening outside China. So that has given me not only opportunity to study and to work abroad, but rather have basically changed my life.
You've had a strong interest in STEM, though. What drove you at an early age to sort of gravitate towards the whole science, technology, engineering, math sort of spaces that we sort of refer to as STEM now?
I think for me it has been rather a natural choice, since both my parents are very much into, let's say, mathematics and physics. And I think since I was young, for me the choice was rather simple. Like I have been a true believer of, let's say, learning new things, especially I was very passionate about mathematics. So one of the reasons driving me coming to Sweden was to be able to learn more about what has been basically, taught, about mathematics, about engineering here in the westward. Since China has been closed, I would say when I came here in 1991, China has been rather closed for a rather long time. That was excitement for me to come out. And that was also excitement for me to be able to join a company like Ericsson then, 4 years after I came to Sweden,
You mentioned both your parents were in maths and physics. Were they in academia, or how did they come about to drive you into that space and build your passion for it?
They both have been working in the engineering field. My dad has been a CEO for an oil company in China, so that he was working on, encouraging girls learning, the right topics, especially mathematics and physics. So I have been fortunate to have my father to support me since I was young, and also about learning English. He was very also passionate about saying that I need to learn other languages, not only just knowing what's happening in China. Yeah.
Wow, that's there's a lot of luck in there in many ways, in that we're born to our parents and we don't choose them, right? But actually, I had a conversation recently with someone that I won't name because they'll kill me, but they were surprised when I told them that China is the largest English-speaking nation in the world. They refused to believe it until they did a web search on it. You mentioned you're about 19 when you sort of made the shift from China to Sweden. Tell us a bit about what sort of drove that. How did that come about?
That was, I have been studying 2 years already in China in the engineering, subject. But then for me, I think, as I told you, that I was very curious about what's happening outside the world, outside China. So I had the possibility to apply for a scholarship. So I got that chance to come to Sweden, even though I didn't know much about Sweden. So that was a rather bold choice I made. You can say that people are rather surprised when they hear the story, which I can tell today then. But I think for me at that time, when I was really young, my desire for learning, my desire for trying new things has, made my, choice rather easy. That was tough, though, the first 2 years here in Sweden. The biggest challenge for me was not the language, it was rather the freedom. The freedom to choose what you want to learn, the freedom to choose, what you want to study, and the freedom to choose, who you want to be friend with. And all those freedoms was overwhelming for me the first 2 years.
We take a lot in the West for granted, and this is something I speak with my kids a lot about. I spend time talking to them about the sorts of things that you're talking about, because I grew up in Papua New Guinea and then the Solomon Islands, and we had a very diverse and multicultural world, and lots of stories similar to what you've just described, where when people came to those regions and had these freedoms, it was like they're reborn, because they'd never had that before. And I imagine the number of cultural shocks, if you'll pardon the pun, of going to Sweden, where I imagine it's a little bit colder, you've got a whole new language and all these freedoms. What was that sort of like, the first year? What were some of the highlights when you sort of got the point where you realised that you were sort of in a space where you now could do these things?
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. My first impression of Sweden is, of course, the language, right? The Swedish language was not at all familiar with. So, of course, when you're around, just going to the subway here in Stockholm and, listen to people around you. I remember my first day here was overwhelming, all these impressions, the new impression you receive. But then when I start learning Swedish, and I think after a few months, I start realizing I actually could understand people around me when they speak Swedish. That was a great moment when I realized, wow, I'm actually part of the conversation. I'm a part of the context. And also the time when I could read, my first book in Swedish without, actually understand the story. That was just like, a door opening, or rather a new window open, like you said, like a newborn experience, right? Yeah.
So you've had a very technical, you've done a lot of stuff around engineering and maths and physics, as you spoke about. You've done a lot of technical stuff. You've had roles like IT, system and service support. You did an SAP implementation, which most people don't survive, so well done on that. You've done a bunch of consultancy work and advisory work, particularly around network services. You were the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer for Ericsson Taiwan in Taipei for a while there, I think about 2.5 years. And then you moved into the cloud space. I'd love to sort of know the transition into that, what that happened in a minute. I think you did about 4 years from memory as the Director of Cloud back in Sweden, Stockholm. And now you've got this exciting role for about 6 months, I think it is, that you actually are the head of the solution line for distributed cloud in Ericsson. Is it the case that you've got this nice combination of I guess, engineering and math and technical skills, but also this MBA and business experience? Does that give you a competitive edge in many ways, because you can sort of you've got a foot in both camps, and so you can see both sides of the coin and see where everyone's coming from a business driver as well as a technical driver?
Yeah, I think the reason, by the way, you're definitely right. So when I decided to try to take the EMBA was very much because the motivation, like you said. I felt like I have had a very, technical background. I had an engineering degree, and I have been working at that time already in Ericsson for more than 10 years with rather engineering type oriented activities. I do feel like I want to learn more about, management, about business related things. So therefore, by the way, I applied for Ericsson scholarship. So 2004, I got the Ericsson scholarship called the Marcus Wallenberg's scholarship for encouraging Ericsson employees who are eager to learn new things. So that's
wow! Congratulations.
Yes, so I got that scholarship, and then I was planning to, by the way, study in Sweden first, in the Stockholm Economics School of Economics. I applied for that, and then at the same time, I was offered to go to Ericsson Japan from Sweden to be the senior expert to help 3G rollout in Ericsson Japan. Then I had a little bit of conflict in terms of timing, but then Ericsson at that time told me that I could basically study the EMBA anywhere in the world. I don't need to only study in Sweden. So therefore, I decided to move to Japan. And later on, the reason why I took EMBA in China is because after 2.5 years in Japan, 3G rollout was very successful. China was very eager to get me there, so Ericsson China really wanted me there. So therefore, we decided to move the family over from Japan to China. And then I have to take my scholarship because it was already 2 years after I received that. Therefore, the decision was to study in China then. So I took this EMBA class, English class, in the China European International Business School. By the way, there was, a great experience, 2 years, part-time EMBA education. So that opened the world for me also, not only about, before that, my word was only Ericsson. But after that, it was so much about, all the great things other people, around, the world outside Ericsson was also very exciting. So I had the classmates who are starting companies, almost like, you have new companies, new ideas every day, right?
Right.
That was also the right timing in China, because 2006, 2007, that was just, the great time in China. So I have colleagues, I have studies, I have, let's say, classmates who have been, very much the ones who are driving the Alibaba, Tencent, and Baidu, those development. So,
wow.
So it was an exciting time, yeah.
It was. It's, in many ways, that whole period, it's sort of just past 2005. I think we sort of had... For a lot of the Western world, we had the early, 2001 through 2003, and then it boomed in 2004. But it sort of, once it hit China, again, it was like the scale is so much larger. And so that would have been an amazing experience. And to be able to do an MBA in the middle of that is quite astounding. The rollout of 3G must have been an interesting challenge, though. What were some of the things you faced in the process, I guess, not just the technology, but just getting the businesses across the line, the partners, the infrastructure, the integration? What sort of challenges did you face in just getting 3G rollout happening?
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. So for us, I think 3G around beginning 2000, the challenge was the license fee was way too expensive for majority operators. Then the possibility for us to turn around was rather around 2004, for example, in Japan. Japan had a special situation when they had the second generation, the PDC technology was, on the way to be phased out. So therefore, the Japanese, operators have urgent need to find a new technology. So 3G technology just came on time. So therefore, I think our focus at that time from Ericsson's side to say, let's help the Japanese customer to speed up their 3G rollout was very right. And that was an exciting time for me when I moved to Japan 2004. We could, for example, migrate 1 million subscribers every month from the 2G PDC system into the 3G network, right? And that was the time SoftBank was very much, SoftBank was formed in 2006. So the speed was amazing. And you're right, in terms of technology, I think that we have already had the right solution at that time. It's just it's a business decision. We need to have players like SoftBank. The CEO of SoftBank was very clear that he wants to phase out 2G network. and then he wants to get the 3G network ready. So once you make your mind, and then, things happen really fast, yeah.
Well, I remember that period. I did a lot of consulting to banks around that period, and a lot of the banks had very large staff, headcounts, particularly on a global scale, and they were just coping with the transition from sort of radio handsets, sort of in the early 90s, I guess, through to the late 90s, and then what you described as PDC, the personal digital cellular technology, yes, which was essentially 2G for many years. Yep. I do remember doing some work in Tokyo and in fact, getting stuck in Narita Airport a couple of nights on cold nights where I couldn't get my flights. And I remember reading that they hit around something like, it really stretches my memory now. I think it was like 80 million subscribers or something that they sort of peaked out. Yep. They could drive at PDC, and the network just couldn't carry anymore for a bunch of reasons. Yeah. And I do remember that whole investment that SoftBank made. It was it hit the media at the time because it was one of those things where there was a Boolean decision. We're going from here to there, and we're doing it now, right? So I can only imagine what that was like on the bleeding edge of that shift, because once someone at that level makes a decision to move, you're kind of sprinting to keep up with them, aren't you?
Yes, yes.
So now I tuned into your, now you're the head of solution line for distributed cloud at Ericsson now, and this is an exciting role. I'd like to get into that. But before we do, I tuned and watched you live, and you were amazing. The whole team were amazing for the live broadcast from the Ericsson studio in Kista in Sweden for the Turn On 5G launch. Tell us a little bit about that. That must have been a good fun event to do for an hour or so online with Facebook Live.
Yes, that was a great experience, and it was really fun. And the Turn On 5G effort has been a great effort, a team effort. We've been working for a long time to get everything in place. But I think that was great that we got fantastic feedback and received a lot of great comments since the live the launch then. Yeah.
I think the great thing for me was that watching it and watching the hundreds of people sort of tune in every few minutes until it got thousands of people, and then it just exploded. And then the flow on through social media, I saw people chatting on LinkedIn groups and LinkedIn directly and posting screen shares, and then certainly Twitter. There was like an informal Twitter chat that followed. People have been waiting for somebody to sort of put the hand up and say, okay, we're turning on 5G, and here it is. And so you almost started that conversation that had been sort of sitting there waiting to happen, and you kicked it off. But underpinning all of this is the Ericsson Distributed Cloud. So I'm really keen to get you to tell us in brief, what is the Ericsson Distributed Cloud? We've heard about OpenStack. We've heard about all kinds of technologies. Yep. What is the Ericsson Distributed Cloud?
Yeah, so the Ericsson Distributed Cloud is very much related to the effort I think we have been doing for years, like you mentioned about OpenStack. So what we're trying to now to introduce this new concept, Distributed Cloud, is very much to combine the best of telecom solutions and the best of the cloud technologies, and including especially OpenStack in that context. So our vision with Distributed Cloud is to help our customer to be able to, especially the telco, let's say, telecom operators, so that they will be able to leverage their infrastructure, which has been deployed as distributed from day one, right? If you look at the telecom infrastructure, so that with the distributed cloud solution, we'll be able to add the cloud capability anywhere in the so-called distributed infrastructure, which operators are having already today, so that they basically can offer a cloud-based solution anywhere in their infrastructure and to run any workload, and with a unified orchestration solution.
When I was reading a number of the blogs that have been put out, and I watched a couple of videos that you did personally recently around this topic, for a lot of the operators that are out there, you've had decades of working closely with all the biggest brands, frankly. What this seems to mean to me is they don't have to do a full refresh and sort of churn and burn. They can take their current infrastructure and essentially sort of in Star Trek terms, Borg the hardware and just start to roll out small implementations and then grow and scale out, so that as they are signing on these millions of subscribers or switching them, your platform can distribute and shift into their infrastructure. They can use existing compute and network and storage and scale out. They can probably drop it in full rack form. But is it correct to think that they can reutilize their current sunk costs and existing compute and data center infrastructure rather than having to throw it all out and start from scratch?
Definitely. I mean, the idea is exactly like you put there. Like our vision is to be able to help our operator customers to be able to leverage their existing investment. And besides, let's say, the infrastructure equipment, there is a lot of investment our customers have been doing over years, like a power transmission, for example, to the sites. And then going back to your specific question, yes, like the existing investment they are doing, for example, on the equipment side, the ambition for us is to be able to utilize, reuse. We need to do a redimensioning basically of the current infrastructure. But then where do you put, the new capabilities, and in what context? I guess we have actually different type of solutions we can look into then for each of the customers. And all this SDN and NFV deployment we have been doing with potential lead customers, those investments are very much part of those components. We are launching them as a part of a distributed cloud solution.
Right. So, and I'm sure if somebody's rolling out new infrastructure in a new location, I mean, there are lots of spaces around South Pacific, Southeast Asia, and certainly even Australia, regional remote areas that are just not connected yet, or they want to add. I'm sure they could drop in whole new infrastructure, but I think there's a lot of interest in the telco space to get another ROI on their investment, because there's a huge sunk cost in rolling out the transition from 3 to 4G and then now 4 to 5. I was interested to read, and also I heard you talking about it on the live Facebook Live thing the other night when I tuned in, because it was about 1 o'clock in the morning my time. You specifically talked about end-to-end orchestration, and I made a note about it because I really wanted to ask you about it. We hear about orchestration, we hear about DevOps, fail fast, we hear about Vagrant and Docker and Kubernetes, and certainly in OpenStack we've got Heat for Heat orchestration and scripts. But I was really interested in the key differentiations around where the telco piece is. I mean, when people think about large brands coming to something like OpenStack, because OpenStack, from my understanding, is effectively the largest open source project in the history of humankind. It's a very unique project, and the scale of it. And we've seen it in data centers and big public clouds. But when the telco space comes in, and you operate at a whole different level of, I guess, high availability, right? I mean, people talk about trying to get 3 nines in a public cloud, but talking to one of your colleagues, Matt Carlson, in your R&D team, he was talking about 5 nines and trying to get 6 nines. What does that mean in the context of end-to-end orchestration and trying to get that level of service level agreement in place, even if you're the first client yourselves internally?
Right. So exactly like what Matt has shared with you, like our focus working with, let's say, open source project, especially like OpenStack, the focus has been to help, let's say, the open source community to understand the requirement from the telco side, and to help the community to truly focus on solutions to be able to drive high availability and reliability type of solution. So the 5 nines, 6 nines, those definitions, like we also want to clarify, is not only about a certain hardware, like you actually need to have, a lower downtime, but rather is end-to-end view, right? So when we talk about 5 nines or 6 nines, it's from, let's say, from the hardware you have, from the hot cost hardware layer, up to basically, all these different layers on the top until like the application itself, right? So there will be different intelligence. So the so-called end-to-end orchestration, that definition is our, let's say, solution about how you can define intelligence in, let's say, on the infrastructure level, so that you will decide how you can, because the resources are virtualized, right? With the network function virtualization, with all this solution, we can decompose, let's say, network resources and reform them when they're needed, right? So that capability has created a huge demand that's saying we need to have a much more intelligence in terms of knowing each network components in the infrastructure, so that they will understand a certain use case would have certain demand for where you should have those resources in the best possible way then. So here we actually talk about to bring the intelligence into, let's say, the overall management orchestration of the network functions rather. And then the network function is not only about a certain, let's say, hardware software, but rather it's, let's say, it's also about the onboarding, the runtime performance of those resources, right?
Yeah, and I guess we should probably put some context in this. I mean, people who haven't necessarily dealt with high availability, when we talk about 5 nines, we're talking about 99.999% availability, which from memory is something in the order of it's just under 5.5 minutes a year, right? So I think it's like not even 30 seconds a month. And
Right.
that's a couple hundred million, like what is it, 700 or 800 milliseconds a day. So it's really not downtime. It's more about, I guess, when we think about people going to work and they're getting email and using a file server, a print server, they're worried about Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. If something breaks at 1 o'clock because someone updated a patch, then you're going to have an early lunch. But if you're talking about telco space, I was very interested to hear you talk about the shift between kind of what, service level availability means. Because when we think about, just getting a dial tone and the response time that you need to get a dial tone from one end to the other and, call connect and, what will probably, I think for me anyway, for some of the bigger stuff that's around the 5G initiative, machine to machine and IoT, autonomous cars, security, and some of the really big stuff like, manufacturing, where you've got robots that weigh 5 tons moving things around. You've got, autonomous vehicles, transport, logistics, aviation. I mean, that's when it really gets to the point where you've got to get those, 6 nines where there really is no downtime. And I guess that's where the distributed component comes in, doesn't it? Because even with good hardware, with the decent, servers and storage and network layers and multiple data centers, you've really got to get the distribution of that service delivery out and about. And I guess this is where, like I remember reading about a thing called the Chaos Monkey at Netflix, where they deliberately engineered a script that would break random parts of the network. And people ask why. It was because if this script randomly broke things and they could engineer their network and infrastructure to keep delivering movies in real time and recover from that, then nothing the world could do to them could beat what they did to themselves. And I imagine that's a similar challenge you have, and that is that you're going to have to deal with so many random potential outages and, diggers digging cables up and still delivering services because there's a baby in the backseat of a car trying to navigate its way around the city. Availability is a completely different context in the telco space, isn't it? It's particularly when you're trying to orchestrate that at a fully software-defined infrastructure layer.
Yes, very true. And that's exactly the challenge I think we have been trying to resolve with, let's say, with the virtualization and technology, right? It was, by the way, very amazing. Like you talk about the 5 nines and the downtime. I forgot to mention, I actually did my sister's work in Ericsson 22 years ago, exactly about availability for mobile infrastructure.
Wow.
At that time, by the way, but at that time already, like we had the vision to have zero downtime. So very much like you describing that, the vision has been, even though that we talk about 5 nines, but then we have been working on solutions like how can we achieve this zero downtime type of capability, exactly like you're describing that.
Yeah.
So now I think we actually are reaching to the point that with the software-defined infrastructure solution, we have a unique concept, by the way, called vPod, the virtual pod concept. And that's the part we have been working, by the way, with Intel for the past years on that. How can you create a vPod concept so that the hardware, you actually can virtualize the hardware resources in a much more efficient way, right? So that become another layer we can add on so that the end-to-end availability can truly be achieved.
Right.
So the intelligence I'm talking about is like the intelligence on different layers, right? So when you have a virtualization capability on the lower layer part, then the high layer should be able to understand what's happening. And, that's, again, the real-time capability you're talking about, right? Yeah.
The other thing I was really keen to get your insight on is, we hear about mobile edge computing, we hear about edge computing in general. Yeah. How does this, what you're doing around the 5G and IoT enablement within OpenStack, how is it different from, I guess, what a lot of people are doing around mobile edge computing and particularly edge computing as a general concept?
Right. So excellent question, by the way. So edge computing as a general concept, I think we are positioning distributed cloud as our solution for edge computing, even though like we want to highlight that we are based the solution based on SD and NFV and the 3GPP edge computing, not the mobile edge computing. So by the way, the ETSI MEC, or initially it was called mobile edge computing, and later on now I think they changed on phase 2 called the multi-access edge computing, right, in order to cover the Wi-Fi part as well.
That's right.
So with that solution, we see the challenge, I think, from the beginning when they formed that, let's say, consortium like 2014. The problem we see that is rather that effort was very much to figure out how they can open up the radio network resources and how they can create APIs so third-party applications can basically work together in the same infrastructure.
Right.
But with that, the price is saying you have to change your network infrastructure, let's say telecom infrastructure. So we see that would be too expensive for our customer then, going back to the same thought we shared before then. So we have a different view on how the network architecture should look like. So therefore, Ericsson has decided not to join at the MEC from the start. We're still having, we are, of course, monitoring the activities there. And we are encouraging, of course, SEMEC to get closer with 3GPP edge computing, because architecture thinking there, like with 3GPP edge computing, when you have the local breakout, when you can separate the user plane from the control plane. And with that capability, that means that we can place the user plane capability anywhere in the infrastructure. So therefore, there is no need for, a new type of solution. There is no need for a new type of equipment to be introduced into a network, right?
And I guess this is something that a lot of people also don't necessarily always appreciate, that is when you get a brand like Ericsson that has very deep pockets, wide resources, and some very big brains like yours applied to these things, even though there are potentially competitive projects like the European Telecommunications Standards Institute's work with Red Hat and others, what tends to be the case is you've had this experience with the 3GPP that you established some time ago that already has the capability. So in many ways, I think they don't necessarily compete. They're simply looking at slightly different parts of the problem, and eventually you'll come back together. But from my experience, when companies like Ericsson work on projects like OpenStack, what I see is that you're a complementary component. You're not really acting like a bully. You're trying to take over. You bring all this additional value in that you've applied it to your problem and being solved, but then you commit the code back up and everybody gets the benefit. And I guess that's really part of the DNA of the organization from what I've seen. Now, we've got an exciting thing coming up soon, and I believe you're going to be joining us with it. 26th of February in Barcelona, Mobile World Congress. I hear there's an exciting demo available on the Ericsson booth that's going to be, I think it's invitation only, but people can apply online. What can you tell us about the demo?
Yes, so we will have quite some demos related to distributed cloud in Mobile World Congress in the coming, let's say, very soon. And there we're going to demonstrate like the solutions I just described to you, that how we can help our telecom customers to be able to have an open platform solution so that they can onboard third-party application very easily. So we're going to show some industrial use cases, which including, like, I think my understanding now, there will be demos related to sorting and digging, and then also like so manufacturing type use cases. We're also going to show certain like content delivery type of use cases, like how we can utilize augmented reality and virtual reality. So that you can not only have exciting, gaming experience, but also you can help, let's say, both the automotive industry and also the manufacturing industry to be much more efficient.
I think augmented reality is going to be a big part of what you've got coming up. I remember talking to a couple of colleagues, and we did some video fireside chats, and we talked about what augmented reality or AR is going to do. And I see augmented reality being a very big plus for a lot of these very heavy industry spaces, where particularly if you've got 3 or 4 really expert, lifelong domain expertise, SME, subject matter experts, sitting in a central location, but you've got second and third tier engineers running around on site, and they can almost just aim their phone at something like a mining environment or a piece of equipment, and the augmented reality with the SME behind the call can sort of see the video and then have the augmented reality overlay with diagrams and highlight the red button to push, and you can end up with a very broad use of that technology in different spaces, automotive, et cetera, and also maybe, increase safety with that. Now, there's going to be I believe that now, if folk who are not attending Mobile World Congress, I've got a note here that to mention that there's going to be a live blog from the Ericsson Digital Live blog. So anyone who's listening and isn't going to be in Spain at Barcelona in the next couple of weeks, you can tune in on if you just search for Ericsson Digital Live blog, you'll find it. Now, before we wrap up, what I'd love to do, and I hope you don't mind me asking this, one of my favorite things to do, Sheng-Ann, is I'd like you to envisage that I'm going to hand you a virtual crystal ball. I'd like you to quickly gaze into it. If you were going to imagine over the next 12 to 18 months, what big things are coming down the line, what's just over the horizon, either you personally, you professionally, in the company, what insights do you think you can share around what's sort of just over the horizon and coming in the world and cloud and what's happening with all the space you're working in, and particularly around the 5G initiatives?
Yes. Okay. By the way, I do love, crystal ball, and then virtual crystal ball is even better. So, great question. Yeah. What's going to happen 18, 12 months ahead? As I mentioned, I think we have been, working on this distributed cloud solution for actually quite a long time, and we are really excited to start doing, more customer engagements. So we have been having, trials and proof of concept type of discussions with some lead customers. So coming 12, 18 months, our focus will be, there will be a lot of not only demos, but true live, let's say, proof of concept type effort we want to work on with our customers, in particular related use cases. For example, like the AR comments you just made, we have done, detailed studies about how AR technology could be applied to manufacturing, factories, how you can save cost, right? So we want to be able to demonstrate the benefits of having the cloud capability close enough to the user then, and help our customer to figure out the business case. And I think that will be the exciting time for us to understand how we can benefit from distributed cloud solution, and how 5G truly can be turned on even faster with this capability.
Well, that's a very exciting note to wrap up on. Sheng-Ann Yu, you're the Solution Line Head for Distributed Cloud and Ericsson Business Area Digital Services. It's been such a pleasure to have time with you chatting away, and thanks for joining me in the studio. By the sounds of things, we've got a very exciting 12 to 18 months ahead of us and beyond with the 5G initiatives and all the work you're working on. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.